Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet,
sponsored by Apple Capital Group.
At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. Today I have the pleasure of having Niels Nielsen Jr. He is a professor of philosophy and religious thought and author of God in the Obama Era there at Rice University. We would like to welcome to the program. If you want to chime into the conversation, please call in at 347-324-3460 or pose your question in the chat room. We will be taking questions after 15 past the hour. Well, welcome to the program, Professor.
Good to be with you.
I guess to begin with, our audience like to hear personal stories about the person. So kind of tell us about yourself and how did you come to Rice?
Well, I went to Pepperdine University in California and then spent some time at Yale, earned my degrees and taught undergraduates there for 3 years. Rice was wanting to expand a little bit in religious studies. We're not a church school, a confessional school, but I had a wonderful time working historically and philosophically with students of a whole variety of backgrounds. I got interested in the religion of the presidents when Jimmy Carter came along.
Wow.
He was a kind of interesting person, and I wrote a book about him, got a German and a Dutch translation, and then I kind of followed along on the ethics and religion of the presidents. There's a whole wonderful variety there. And then I tried to bring it up to date on this interesting fellow, Barack Obama.
Tell us, if you know, how about Jimmy Carter, what prompted you to write something about religion with him up to today's date?
Carter got into office by going to Iowa and reporting himself as a twice-born Christian.
Wow.
And he's to the present an idealist, his own kind of Southern Baptist, very much his own type. I suppose if I were to bring my book up to date now, I'd have some perspective on Carter that I didn't have when I wrote it. But religion's always in the background of the American presidency. It's disestablished in our country. We don't want union of church and state. But in this separation of church and state, religion has flourished. Americans are quite a religious lot. And now we have a Mormon candidate. That something's new, and a black president. And what I try and do in my book is to be not just eulogistic or say good things. I try and be critical, look at the problems. President today has to deal with Iraq. He has to deal with Iran. He has a whole problem in the Middle East. And I think there are a lot of things that Americans need to view critically there.
Wow. And from this new born-again Christian from Jimmy Carter, and I remember when he ran in the late 70s, to what we have today, even you look at the presidential appointments to the Supreme Court, then also you look at President Obama. Now we have a Mormon that's running. How does, in your opinion and your thoughts, how Americans will accept having a Mormon? It's not a born-again Christian, it's not a Catholic. Even they have some issues with Catholics, but going all the way to this, not extreme, but going through discerning a candidate who is actually a Mormon.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. If you look at the figures on the surveys, still about 18% of Americans say they wouldn't vote for a Mormon. It's a fascinating religion. It's very much a part of the candidate's life. I think this time we're fortunate to have two Harvard graduates, both from Harvard Law School, running against each other for the presidency. And both of them are well-trained and competent people. Romney, I think, was a successful governor. I think his Mormonism will enhances what he has to offer. The interesting thing about it is that the religious right, the Protestant religious right, and to a considerable extent the Roman Catholic religious right, if one can use that kind of phrase at all, both those groups are accepting Romney and supporting him. This is always, if you compare it with Europe, my wife's European, Americans are much more interested in religion. My undergraduates, whatever their religious background, were curious about it and interested in it. And it's here in the American milieu. It's in the shadows, but it's still around. John F. Kennedy, of course, was our first only Roman Catholic president, and Romney said, "Treat me the same way." Kennedy made his speech affirming full separation of church and state right here in Houston. You can't look at the American scene without it, but then it has interesting side winds, as they say.
Wow. It kind of tells us a lot of our people don't know anything about the Mormon Church. I mean, in the past, it was just branded like a cult. And not to be fair, this is what people used to, because it didn't have those fundamental beliefs. Can you bring us to date? What is Mormonism?
Well, there's a lot of good literature on it now. Joseph Smith, of course, was the founder and lived in upstate New York as well as in New England. He got the Book of Mormon from the gold plates that he claimed were given to him. It's a very American in the sense that it says true Christianity was abandoned at the end of the apostolic period. So Mormonism is a restoration of true Christianity with its apostles. And one of the problems, of course, was that Smith was a bigamist and advocated bigamy. His church has long since abandoned that. You know, it's centered in Salt Lake City. It accepts the scriptures, the Christian scriptures, and adds to them the Book of Mormon and some other books. These are very earnest and upright people. Its Brigham Young University is perhaps the largest church-sponsored university in the United States. Young Mormons go out. Some of my friends have gone out for a year of missionary work. Mitt Romney did his missionary work in France, was nearly killed in an automobile accident, and himself has functioned as a bishop in the Mormon Church. It's very positive, American kind of institution. There are certain views that are not there in the other American churches. There is baptism for the dead, picking on a word of St. Paul, and this puts an outreach. There's wonderful genealogical work done if you want your genealogy. Salt Lake City is the place to go and get it. There is celestial marriage. A marriage is permanent and will go on through all eternity. And the true believers will be rulers on other planets. It has a very strong family ethic, and it was about time we were having a Mormon candidate. We had two of them, of course, you understand. The former governor of Utah also ran. He'd been ambassador to China. So Americans are having to learn about Mormonism, and it's something different, even as we're having to learn about Islam. And there's a certain rub in learning something new.
Wow. So let's back up for a second. We have a question here, since we talked about this topic before we switch into your book. Does the Mormon believe in Jesus Christ?
Oh, yes. Romney will give a wonderful testimony to Jesus' divinity and to Jesus' atonement. And the New Testament material, of course, is supplemented by the Mormon scriptures. But this is a $64 question. Are the Mormons Christians? And I try and be objective about it. Yes and no, because they add to Christianity, or to traditional Christianity, It's a very different kind of thing than, say, the Anglican Church or the Roman Catholic Church that has continuity through the centuries. It does claim a priesthood, and it is sacramental. And the temple, of course, is closed to all but the true baptized, except when the temples are first built, the non-baptized. So it's a very morally upright. Mormons don't drink tea or coffee or Coke, but they're a vital part of American life, and by and large, I think, a very positive part of American life.
You also mentioned a couple of other things regarding marriage is forever as one point, but what happened all of a sudden when they decide to abandon what they previously believed and believe that marriage to one person is for life?
Well, there was a long fight with the federal government about this.
Okay.
Smith himself was murdered, and it was Brigham Young who led the Mormons, tens of thousands of them, groups immigrating from Europe to Salt Lake City and establishing their headquarters and temple there. Afro-Americans, blacks, were not allowed to the priesthood until fairly recently. It's a church with a strong hierarchy, with a president, with a group of apostles. It can be said sociologically to be something of a sect by its strong character of membership. Mormons participate in their social work and in their church services, but it certainly has a strong belonging group. There are some who drop out, and like any other religion, then they're anti. But it's very American.
Okay. Last two questions before I actually go into your main topic.
There's some very good literature on that.
Okay.
If our listeners just want to check it out on Amazon, some very good books written by Mormons and non-Mormons. It's a fascinating kind of history.
Any books you recommend?
Well, yeah, they're in my my book, but it's on the internet.
Okay. The last one you mentioned something about is if you want to, they have an outstanding archive of history. If you want to look for your ancestors, why is that?
Well, you see, there's a book in one of St. Paul's letters in which Paul says, "What shall we do for those who are baptized for the dead?" So one of the things that came with Joseph Smith and with Mormonism is they are baptized for their ancestors. And if you think baptism is necessary for salvation, then this is what goes on with the Mormons. If you want to say something negative about that, they were baptized for people that were killed in the Holocaust. The Jewish group, Jewish community simply protested. But if I wanted to find out about Nielsen for 1,000 years back in Denmark, the place to go to find out about that is Salt Lake City. So this is a very unique and distinguishing kind of thing about Mormons. Mm-hmm. But their strong sacramental sense, their strong sense of hierarchy and priesthood, it's traditional Christianity with very American modifications.
Okay.
One really needs to go to Salt Lake City and visit it and hear the choir that there is at Christmas time. And, of course, the traditional response of Protestants, and I suppose Roman Catholics as well, is very negative because of the bigamy factor there. Romney's own family was in Mexico to avoid the bans on Mormonism in this country. Abraham Lincoln sent the troops out to long fight about bigamy. Time had a section 2 or 3 weeks ago about some people who were still very attractive women practicing bigamy. Abraham had wives, but this is not the Mormons have a strong family ethic, and they're very simply a positive part of American life.
Wow. We're going to take a break for a moment, and then we're going to dive into your book. We'll be back after this commercial break. Thank you for listening. You listen to the Core Business Show.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a one-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com. Welcome back to the Core. Once again, here's Tim Jacquet. You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing.
Okay, we're back with the program. We had a power surge for a second, so I'm sorry about that. We had a power surge, so we had to reboot the system during the commercial break. Dr. Nielsen, you still there?
I'm still here, sir.
Okay, I guess, apologize for that. Hey, let's talk about God in the Obama era. Talk about your thoughts in your book on that.
Well, the fascinating thing about Obama is his mother was a sociologist and anthropologist. She was a skeptic. She studied all religions, but none were accepted. She took her children to services in Hawaii where they grew up on Christmas Eve. They visited Bora Bora when the family was in Indonesia. Obama is a person who came to accept Christian faith while he was in Chicago as a sociological worker. So whereas Romney is a cradle Mormon, Obama is a convert. And he converted and joined a very activistic church in Chicago, one that advertised itself as both black and Christian. But he's a person who studied religions. He was in Indonesia with his mother for a while. He probably knows more about world religions than any other president that we've had. But I think his faith is very clearly expressed, for example, in the recent prayer breakfast. A fair percent of people who are opposed to Obama, there's no other way to put it, it's more than 10%, want to argue that Obama was a Muslim, is a Muslim. He's chased out his birth certificate to prove that he's not. But I think he's a sincere and informed Christian, even as I think Romney is a sincere and informed Mormon. The thing about American religion, I think you must know, Roman Catholicism takes on an American guise. What goes on in America is pluralism and tolerance. Thank God for both. This is a country premised on religious freedom, and that's out in the experience of our president. Now, in America, I think it can be said the Mormons were persecuted. The blacks certainly, George Washington would be terribly surprised, if not shocked, to encounter someone like Romney and would probably say, buddy boy, get back in the slave pen. This is something really remarkable, I think, unique at least, that we've jumped Catholic Protestant barriers in Kennedy. Some of us were quite enthusiastic, maybe naively enthusiastic about Kennedy, but Obama has this background. It's University of Chicago background. He was University of Chicago, and then he did the Harvard Law Review as editor. And the interesting thing about that is the Justice of the Supreme Court was also editor of the Harvard Law Review. And that kind of pluralism, what's characteristic of Americans, we have a lot of intermarriage. It's more between Protestants, but it also runs over the lines between Catholics and Protestants and Jews. I was just down this last week to the new Muslim temple in Houston. Pluralism, I think, is a very wonderful thing. It enables religion to flourish. It also has certain dangers, of course, of religion dissolving, but there's not a... If anyone tried to say, well, I don't believe in God and run me for president, he wouldn't last very long. Mm-hmm. But I think someone like George Bush Jr. Was not as... He had a conversion experience, but there's a tremendous variety in American presidents. Obama's model certainly is Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln was, on the one hand, I think most of the literature would agree, one of the most religious presidents we've had. In the Gettysburg Address, it's a theological document, but on the other hand, Lincoln was not a church member. I think it can be said safely he was not a born-again Christian. He grew up on the frontier and didn't like what he saw in religion there. So there's a whole variety in the American kind of thing. Teddy Roosevelt's our activist. He wants to change the world. Woodrow Wilson's a tragic war president, but the war was tragic. Franklin Roosevelt was an Anglican vestryman who brought both Jewish and Catholic figures into American government. So there's this whole American pattern here that's very different than the European pattern in most places, and I think very creative. And Obama and Romney are part of that pattern.
Wow. So does the person, as they grow up, does religion really affect the way they make decisions in life? And as an administrator, does it also influence how they make their appointments as well to the Supreme Court and how they conduct their administration?
Well, it's a very interesting thing now. There is not a long tradition of Roman Catholics in the Supreme Court. There was one signer of the Declaration of Independence from the Carroll family, a relative of Bishop Carroll. But now we have 6 Roman Catholics. 6 of the 9 justices are Roman Catholics. And this is a fascinating development, American tradition. Roman Catholic immigration came to this country after the Civil War. It's after the Civil War that we have large numbers of Roman Catholic and Jewish immigrants and some overt anti-Catholicism, but certainly now we have 3 major groups in America: the Jewish, the Roman Catholic, and the Protestant. And I've had some very happy friendships with Roman Catholic hierarchy here when they've had to deal with them in terms of the university. Yeah, I think Americans, I have 2 grandchildren, are concerned for religion, but it's I think one of the beauties of it is you can reject it. It doesn't come down from authoritarianism as in some European, or if you look at the African, or the religion flourishes in. This is one of the things I think that America has to give to the rest of the world, is freedom and tolerance. It came in the Roman Catholic tradition in the Second Vatican Council, but lots of intermarriage. America is a free but a religious country. That's a kind of a paradox, that Russia has got religion back again now. So 60 or 70% of them are Eastern Orthodox, 5% church attendance. Well, in America, we get 35, 40% church attendance in many parts of the country. And there's a certain openness here. I'm a little up on it because I had students, when they take your course, well, they want to learn about Hinduism. So, well, learn a little Hinduism and Buddhism. If you learn another religion, you'll learn more about your own religion. And we do have active Hindu and Buddhist communities here. And there's internationally, I've been to the Vatican and met the people at the World Religions Group, and they're very interested in Buddhist, Christian, exchange. There are places on earth where Christians are persecuted along with Buddhists, but the American scene is a very different kind of scene. If you look at the presidents, there's a whole tradition here. Look at a man like Clinton, a fascinating fellow, he had his moral problem, but he was Southern Baptist. His mother was not anything he was. If you look at a man like Nixon was he was a religious guy. Guy is the word for it, probably. But also a moral failure. But Nixon had his religious moments very much.
Well, get us back up for a second. When we talk about the Roman Catholics, is there a particular reason that you can see why we're having more Roman Catholic justices on the Supreme Court?
No, I think it's just a good part of American life. Of course, the Latin Americans, we draw a couple of the Roman Catholic school, Georgetown in particular, Catholic University a little bit, but Georgetown in particular, Roman Catholics do very good work in legal tradition, and it reaches back to the Middle Ages. So lawyers from Georgetown are very well-trained people, and it's one interest that goes with canon law and Catholic interest. Not to say that we don't have good Jewish lawyers or Protestant lawyers, but I think there's a certain vitality to American Catholicism that living in the midst of what has been Bible Belt in many respects, you don't take your own religion just for granted. And, of course, we do have in America a certain amount of skeptical tradition. We have some very overt atheists, but we don't put them in jail. We learn from them. And I've just been down at the new Muslim temple, as I say, and I'm up on pluralism. It seems to me to have wonderful kind of advantages, but limitations.
Well,
you can ask, what would Washington do today? I think that's a fascinating question. He's a very shrewd man, not an intellectual or an academic. He believed very much in religious freedom. They were a very excellent group of men, those first half dozen founding fathers, to get this country free from England in the first place, and then to be people of the Enlightenment. John Adams sent a letter to the Muslims in Morocco. We're not a Christian country. We're a tolerant country. And these were people very much steeped in freedom, the Enlightenment, but the first 4 of the 6 held slaves. So Washington and Jefferson, too, were all the time talking about freedom. Jefferson was interested in religion very much as a man of the Enlightenment. He and Madison certainly brought religious tolerance to this country, but the Civil War was a tragic kind of war, very deeply religious on both sides, as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And religion's in the blood of the Americans, but not in terms of religious establishment.
Wow. What do you like to leave us with in your book, and where can we find your book? I know you mentioned at the top of the hour. Also, if you have a website as well.
God in the Obama Era, yeah. And both of my books, my new book on, I try and bring this up to date in my new book on 212 presidential election. But I think there's some interesting questions there that have to be debated. American religion has taken a turn toward the right in fundamentalism, and in reaction against it, a certain kind of liberalism. This is a country that has its Billy Graham, and it's what I try and show in this book is how would someone like Lincoln look at our present time. Stephen Carter, who's a black, has written a wonderful book on Lincoln, a novel trying to figure out what would have happened if Lincoln had not been assassinated. What had happened if he lived on? What problems would he have faced in Reconstruction? But I think Lincoln's a very great man, but he's not an academic. And he believes in God firmly, but not in the revivalist born-again tradition. What would Teddy Roosevelt be if he came into our situation? Teddy'd have to learn something, because he was very pro-war. He thought war was a very noble thing and noble the human race. Look at World War I, in which Roosevelt's own son was killed. So we've had a whole variety of people. I think one of the really great achievements of the Americans and the period after World War II is the way in which Western Europe and America handled the communist question and finally outlasted communism in Eastern Europe, helped to bring it down. That's a remarkable time of time when America was selling freedom and democracy in a Stalin period. And Roosevelt knew that Stalin didn't believe in God and told him to quit persecuting people. Russia was a terrible time of persecution for more than a quarter of a century there, one of the worst in all human history. And Americans believe that religion is necessary to a fulfilled life. And that's what we call civil religion. The Jews, the Roman Catholics, and the Protestants, and as well as the Mormons, are convinced that we can't run our national life just on power, just on might, but in God we trust. And that's pretty deep in the American tradition, and I think we'll see that no matter who wins this coming election.
Wow. Well, what's well said. Again, I really appreciate you coming on to the program. Anything you'd like to add in closing?
Well, the details are in my books.
Okay.
They're both on Amazon.
Perfect. Amazon. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on the program and giving us a wealth of information about the God in the Obama era. And I guess we'll see what happens after the election.
Good. Yes, indeed. Yes. Great talking
I'm sure
with
to
you.
give you a call. Yeah, same here. Take care.
Thank
you for coming on to the program. Again, it's been a production of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. You can download this episode on iTunes and Blog Talk Radio. Please check out Dr. Nielsen's book, which is on Amazon, God in the Obama Era. We're surely going to have him back on the program after the election to see what he's forecasting for the future for America. Thank you for listening to the program. Tim Jacquet, your host. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet. For a free quote on equipment leasing and financing, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. And fill out the information to receive your free quote. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the Core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. Thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet.